podcast show for business owners and managers who are passionate about developing people and growing a successful business. And now here's your host, Alistair Booth from the HR Booth.
Lindsey, thanks for joining our podcast. As you know, my name's Alistair Booth and I run a business called the HR Booth. We provide outsourced HR services to a range of kind of companies right across the UK and a mixture of some kind of charities in amongst that as well. Really passionate about developing great workplaces. So, you know, the podcast is designed around raising awareness on different topics that help businesses. And as I said, we've got a range of kind of companies right across the country that we support. So really appreciate you taking the time out your busy schedule to kind of share a little bit about your kind of story and a little bit about the kind of Close the Gap organisation as well. So for our viewers and listeners, can you tell us a wee bit about yourself and a little bit about the organisation, if that's okay, Lindsey?
Sure. So thanks very much for having us. It's really delighted to be able to speak to you today and all of your listeners. I'm Lindsey. I am the Head of Policy and Development at Close the Gap. And we're the UK's expert organisation working on women's inequality in the labour market. So our work covers quite a broad range of areas. We do research to close the data gaps that are out there on women's workplace inequality, which really helps us to develop evidence-led solutions that we know will work. We also do policy advocacy, so engaging with Scottish and the UK governments to call for policy changes that will help tackle gender inequality and crucially support employers to, you know, take the action that they need to take as well. And on that, we do a lot of work directly with employers to support them. That includes guidance and tools that we develop that employers can use on a self-service basis, but we also work one-to-one with employers to provide them with support. That might be on pay gap data analysis or action planning, policy review for HR people and training. And one of the big pieces of work we do with employers is we deliver a world-leading employer accreditation programme called Equally Safe at Work, which supports public and third sector employers to take action on gender inequality and violence against women within their organisations.
Wow, so quite a broad range of kind of subjects that you're supporting with, and typically, Lindsey, then you mentioned that then obviously kind of supporting employers. Like what size of kind of employers then are you typically supporting, or is it so wide ranging?
It's really wide ranging. We support employers in the public, private and third sectors, from very small SMEs, you know, with like, say, sort of like, you know, your 10, 20, 30 employees, all the way through to, you know, big companies with 10,000 plus employees. And that we've got, you know, nearly 25 years actually of experience of doing that, and working with all of those different types of employers has taught us a lot about what might work in different sizes and different sectors, and what might not work, and how to help those employers identify where they can, I guess, really get the best bang for their buck in terms of what action they can do, because you can't do everything. And knowing where to start is really difficult. But if you can identify like 1 or 2, 3 things that you can focus on, that's the best way for employers to create change.
Brilliant. And how long have you been in the organisation then, Lindsey?
I've been with Close the Gap for almost 12 years.
Wow, okay. That's a long time.
It is a long time.
Yeah, good. And a lot of change in that time then?
A lot of change, we've really grown as an organisation and expanded our expertise in the type of work that we do. And we've had some really great successes, and we're at a really interesting an exciting time for the organisation. We're expanding. We've got a new project coming up on young mothers employment, because young mothers are one of the most excluded groups in the labour market and in society. And so there's not a lot of data out there on the specific issues that they might face and what employers can do to understand those and provide opportunities for that group. So that'll be a really exciting piece of work that we're taking forward in partnership with Save the Children over the next couple of years.
Fantastic. That's really interesting. So I was going to ask, the next question was just around like kind of progress, but I suppose you know you've been in the organisation 12 years. Like during that time, what progress have you then seen, like in kind of gender equality over that time, and where do you think there's still work to be done?
I think there's been a lot of progress over the last 12 years. There's been some regulations that have come in that have, you know, encouraged or enabled employers to actually gather their pay gap data and report that, and that's been a really positive step in creating a lot more visibility for the gender pay gap as an issue within employers, but also in wider society. For us, in terms of the impact of our work, we definitely see employers, we're kind of moved beyond or moving beyond that kind of employers understanding that it is an issue into employers wanting to know, well, what can we do, and seeing more employers take that action. We look at employers who publish their pay gap every year, and while there is still a lot of progress to happen, we're seeing those first green shoots of that data transforming into action.
Good.
So there is progress.
There is progress,
but I think
still a lot to do.
we're a long way off from where we need to be.
It was interesting. I was out early this morning. I had a kind of networking event. I was at very early, so silly o'clock, but I did catch a little bit on the news just before I was leaving. And I think the stat, it was something, I can't remember what the source was, Lindsay, but they were talking about kind of women in kind of director roles. And I think it was something like 43% of women now in the FTSE 350 companies are directors. But I didn't catch the stat where it came from. I caught the stat, sorry, but I didn't catch where it had come from. So I'm not sure if that was something you knew about that you maybe kind of saw today, but it's been reported on the news this morning early on.
Yeah, I did see the headline. I haven't looked at the data behind it yet. There's definitely been progress in terms of women on boards over the past 10, 12, 20 years. But one thing that we have seen, when previously when we've seen reporting on women on boards and identifying that kind of increase that we're seeing over the years, which is great, is, and this might not be the case in this particular piece, but what we have seen is that it tends to be non-executive roles that we're seeing the biggest increases in. So really pushing those women into those executive roles is what we need to see, those decision-making roles, and having that influence and visibility, particularly to the workforce. So if we're seeing movement in that, then that's really, really positive.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. My experience, certainly, if I think back to before I was in the HR booth and working with big kind of organisations, and even some of the bigger clients we work with at the HR booth, if I think back to the females that were in senior positions, it tended to be HR directors or finance directors. And I'm not, obviously I've not been like in a corporate role for a number of years, so I'm not sure if that has kind of changed much, but that was certainly, if I think back to my career, that was where you saw that. And then still the other roles in terms like the chief exec, managing directors, operations directors, predominantly kind of made up by men. So it'd be good if that has kind of moved on a lot since then.
It really would be.
Yeah, good. So obviously we're talking today, so it's in relation to kind of International Women's Day. So kind of looking to kind of see, why is that important, and how can organisations contribute to the message behind that as well, Lindsay?
I think with International Women's Day, it's really important. It's a really important reminder of the importance and the necessity of specific action to advance women's equality. There's many, many issues with inequality in society, and all of these require attention, but we know that generic approaches to tackling inequality are really ineffective. Inequality in itself doesn't mean a lot as a term. The drivers of inequalities experienced by different groups are different, and so we need to really focus on the specific causes for each group if we're to address it. So a really important aspect of International Women's Day more recently is engaged really closely with intersectionality and acknowledging that gender inequality is also different for different groups of women. For example, a Black woman will experience a combination of both racism and sexism that creates really specific barriers to equality for her. So we need to pay attention to those differences and those similarities if we're to understand what needs to change and how to create that change. And, International Women's Day is a really good time for organisations to reflect on what they can do, and they can contribute through really meaningful engagement with the issue, learning about gender inequality, what it looks like for different women, what it looks like in their own organisations and workplaces, and then more importantly, taking that next step and turning that into action and not just warm words.
Yeah, no, good message. And we'll definitely make sure that is shared with our kind of audience in the podcast. Good. You touched on just earlier there, Lindsay, as well about some of the kind of other projects that you're going to be involved with, and specifically talking about kind of mothers in the workplace and supporting that. So that's something we see quite a bit, actually. So even in our own small team, we've got we offer kind of part-time working options, and we've got kind of hybrid working, which does help the kind of young mothers in our team. But I've seen it historically with clients as well, where we're trying to encourage our kind of client base to be more open to kind of part-time and hybrid working, because there is such an abundance of talent out there, and the amount of women that we see that have given up work because there's a lack of flexibility in the workplace. They still want to kind of work, but there's so many barriers, and then you've got the kind of childcare challenges and things like that. So it's definitely kind of helped our business, and I know for our clients that are open to that, it's definitely kind of helped them, and we see that, and that's a frustration I still have as a business owner and an HR professional, is that there's so many people still will advertise a job Monday to Friday, 9 till 5, office based, and no kind of flexibility, and they really are missing a real kind of trick around that. So we are doing our best to try and kind of change that kind of narrative around that. So I don't know if you got like any other kind of stats on that at all, or anything around that to share that would maybe be helpful.
I don't have any statistics offhand, but I mean, you've identified there absolutely one of the biggest barriers that women face in the workplace today.
Yeah.
And it's rooted in that kind of really persistence of deeply gendered caring roles. It's 2025, we've got paternity leave and shared parental leave, and men are playing a much bigger part in parenting and caregiving, but it's still a long way off from equal. And those kind of norms exist outside of the workplace, that will affect the pipeline into employers, but they also exist within workplace, because it's part of society. And women also still have that second shift of domestic labour, and the division of labour in the home at a social level hasn't really shifted much in decades. And that double impact affects women's ability to work. It's much more contingent than men's on the ability to find that work that fits around their caring roles. And as you said, flexible working is a lot more common, but it's not often flexible in the way it needs to be. It's maybe not responsive. It might be like very rigid core hours and not much kind of movement between that. And it's very often, particularly part-time work, not found in senior roles and better paid roles. And part-time work is absolutely key to many women's ability to work, and it prevents those women from progressing. And it's something that we've talked about a lot, expanding. I think a lot of employers, because flexible working is more on the agenda, and maybe they offer it in some form, think, oh well, we do flexible working, we don't have anything to think about. But it's not necessarily progressing in the way it needs to be, and particularly, as you said, that part-time work. And there are some employers that we've seen through looking at pay gap reporting and what employers are seeing, that have had some really great success. First Group, First Bus, all the to deliver public transport service through the UK. They a few years ago realized they were facing a bit of a recruitment challenge, and they also identified that a really small proportion of their workforce is women. Such a simple step, but they introduced part-time bus driver roles, and they doubled the number of women in their workforce, and they expanded their talent pool, and they had a really great campaign to highlight that to women, and it just shows you such a simple thing just completely expands that pool of people that you're able to recruit from. Yes, so simple, and yet too many employers don't really kind of think outside the box in that way.
Exactly. It's just stuck in their ways, so traditional, and and I thought as well, with kind of COVID and hybrid working and the acceleration of technology, that would have moved on at a greater pace, but it just doesn't seem to have done so, unfortunately. But more work to be done on that, so we'll keep banging that drum. Good. So touched on there obviously some of the biggest barriers, but then what else then can organisations do to improve like workplace culture to better support women then? What's your thoughts on that?
I think workplace culture is a really tough nut to crack, and it kind of it's because it encompasses such a wide range of things. The first important step for employers is to kind of move beyond the buzzword of workplace culture to understanding what it actually means. It's not one thing, it's like a combination of processes and policies and attitudes and behaviours that exist in a workplace. I mean, they have a big impact on staff, but because it's not just one thing, employers need to take action in a range of areas to change it. And it's really hard, I think, for employers to see workplace culture in their own organisations. It's the water that you swim in, you work in it every day and it just becomes the norm. And it's not, I think, the way that workplace culture issues function, it's not necessarily the intention to exclude people. It doesn't matter if it's not intentional. People are affected, and cultural norms can result in some people, for example, women being put at a disadvantage. And so it's really, for us, when we're talking about workplace culture, it's essential for organisations to take a step back and to try to take that objective view of the culture in their business. In particular, those senior leaders and managers need to be really willing to be challenged and to honestly confront the issues they identify. We very often see businesses falling into that trap of, well, that would never happen here. That would never happen in our workplace. But, particularly when we're talking about issues like sexual harassment, people don't like to think that, stuff like this goes on in their workplace, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't. The statistics tell us that it does. 70% of women will experience or witness sexual harassment. That's is not happening in your workplace. And so falling into that trap isn't going to get you anywhere. So we need the employers to be willing to go, maybe there's some things that we've not got right in the past, or there's some things that we could do differently in the future. And I think we've had that recent change to legislation at a UK level on sexual harassment. So there's now a duty on employers to take steps to prevent sexual harassment, not just to address it. And so we are working very hard with a lot of employers to support them to understand what does that look like. And what that looks like is recognising that sexual harassment is a massive factor to do with sexist workplace cultures and gender inequality, and taking steps to tackle those things, as well as, doing good risk assessments and having good policies and reporting procedures. It's doing all of that together that will really kind of break the cycle in the workplace.
Absolutely, and we've done some training on that ourselves on the back of that legislation changing, and it was interesting just in terms of some of the discussions with clients and businesses on that. So it's great to hear that you've been doing likewise. Good. I was also going to say there as well, just I was conscious of this quite a bit. We had so recently actually our first woman who'd been on maternity leave in our business, so that was kind of new territory for us as a business. So I was just mindful of that. So even things like we do kind of regular team updates, making sure that she was still included in that. We put together like a company newsletter so that there was information going out to her home address so that she kind of felt involved. And it was really, and then using the kind of keeping in touch days as well. So that, and I know she kind of commented to say that she found that really helpful, and able to just keep in touch with everybody through, like if we were doing social events, being invited and being included, and then the face-to-face kind of team meetings and things, giving her that without kind of insisting you have to come, and just giving her that option. But I think she kind of really benefited from that. And I know what I'm like. If I've been on holiday for 2 weeks, coming back in, but if someone been out of the business for a year, it's a massive kind of change. And we're saying to clients that they need to be, making kind of different adjustments around that and trying to accommodate that, because so often, women will come back after maternity leave, try it for a little bit, and then just as kind of felt they're forced to leave because the employer's not really made the necessary changes and adjustments to support that. So that's something that we're definitely kind of speaking to kind of clients about in the future as well. So, but
and that's great to hear. And that's, as you're saying that, it's not rocket science.
Exactly.
It's so simple. It's just about being there, establishing, a shared understanding of what communication is going to look like, recognising that it's important to keep people involved and to keep people connected and to support them when they come back. That's the thing that makes the difference and enables women to come back into the workplace and to stay in the same role and to progress, which is really important.
Yeah, definitely. Good stuff. So going to move on just to a couple of general questions just around International Women's Day now, Lindsey. So going to kind of talk about the hopefully the kind of positive future change around that, and the role that your organisation Close the Gap can play. So and your thoughts on how can International Women's Day become more than just like a symbolic event and translate into real sustained change?
I think what we need for employers, businesses to do is to build an understanding of gender inequality, what it looks like in your company, but to see this as a first step only. We often meet employers that are really keen to learn. They're asking what the issues are, what do they need to do. But all too often we see that this is where it stops. You know, the information might just like sit on a shelf. It doesn't translate into meaningful action. And that's not necessarily because, you know, they don't want to do anything. There's still that kind of hesitancy. How do we embed this? How do we make it practical and actionable in our organisation? So we need to companies to move beyond what their data is telling them, what they've learned, and then use what they've learned to take real action. Gender equality in the workplace shouldn't just be a priority one day or 1 month a year. We need employers to actually do something, to take concrete steps, otherwise we'll stay stuck. And I mentioned earlier, I think you can't do everything all at once. So really kind of identifying those, you know, what's the priority, what's the issues in your business, and what are the things you can do to focus on them, even if you just focused on one area, particularly for those smaller businesses who might have fewer resources. They might not even have an HR team, you know, to rely on. It's kind of figuring out, well, what's the one step that we can take that might make a difference, and do that and see where it takes you.
Brilliant. And is there any, without kind of breaking any kind of confidentiality, is there anything around like any of the smaller organisations that you've worked with that they've done something really well that has kind of helped embed that into the long-term strategy? Is there any kind of good kind of learning from that at all?
I think what we've seen with those smaller businesses, again, is just figuring out how to make it part of their day-to-day. And one thing that we've got that employers can use themselves is we've got a tool that we developed specifically for SMEs, and it's called Think Business, Think Equality. And it was developed with SMEs in mind and recognising those particular challenges, and it kind of covers a lot of different themes: flexible working, recruitment, progression, pregnancy and maternity, sexual harassment, workplace culture. So a small business can say, I'm interested in how I can make flexible working work. They can answer a few questions and then get some personalised answers. And so we've seen employers like smaller businesses have some real success from that. Takes the pressure off them. They're not having to kind of scramble to do all that information gathering themselves. And it kind of helps them to see, you know, what all I need to do is these few things, and then to get me started, and then I can, you know, actually understand what flexible working is and what it might look like for me and my business. So it's the specific things that work in different employers are not necessarily super different, you know. There's a lot of commonalities, but it's just understanding how to target it and where your starting point is that we've seen the greatest successes for SMEs in particular.
Brilliant, good answer there. And what do kind of Close the Gap aim to achieve then within the next 5 to 10 years? What are you hoping to achieve?
That's a big question.
I know.
I think, well, our visions for a Scotland where women have good working lives, where they have real choice, a choice of career, a choice in how they balance childcare with work, choice in when and where to progress, and freedom from sexism in the workplace. So we really want to spend less time in the future making the case for action and more time supporting that action. I said, you know, before, gender inequality isn't something that should have to be argued for. You know, it's in everyone's interest, and we want organisations to see the positive impact of gender equality rather in their bottom line, but also to recognise that it's the right thing to do. And, you know, we're very committed to supporting employers. We've really would encourage employers to make use of all of the free guidance and tools that we have. I mentioned Think Business, Think Equality. Over 12,000 businesses have used that since it was launched to change how they do business. And we've been working recently with SMEs to improve it and expand it. And we'll be launching a new version of that this spring. So I would encourage your listeners to keep an eye on our website. Brilliant. But we've also got a tool for larger employers called Close Your Pay Gap that helps them to report their gender pay gap and meet the regulations around that. So that's our aim, really, to get employers to understand that there are tools out there that exist that they can use them to create change, and just identifying those priorities for you and taking the next step. That's how they create momentum, and that's how they show that they're more than just warm words once a year. And how we'll work to that vision for a better labour market for women.
Brilliant, fantastic. You touched on there as well quite a bit, Lindsey, around like the different tools and things. So for our audience, is there a good way for them to access that information? Is there like the website? Is that the best protocol, or is there a contact address for
Yes.
yourself or your team? What's the best way to find out about the work that you guys are doing at the minute?
Our website is closethegap.org.uk, and that has a whole load of information on our work, but also on the front page has links to the Close Your Pay Gap tool, which again is just closeyourpaygap.org.uk,
Right.
and our Think Business, Think Equality tool, which again is just thinkbusinessthinkequality.org.uk. Very simple website addresses.
Fantastic.
And so that's where they can find all the information that they need. And there's also options on each of those websites to contact us, because some employers, the self-service, kind of answer some questions, get some personalised actions and take away and do it themselves. That'll be ideal for them. For other employers, they might need that bit of extra support, so you can get in touch with us and find out what we can do to support you.
Brilliant. So what we will do in the podcast, Lindsay, is to make sure a kind of copy of that is in the show notes. So links to the sites that you've mentioned there. We'll put that in our newsletter as well, and we'll share that with our audience. And hopefully, you know, some people can reach out on the back of that. But thanks for your time. I've actually learned quite a bit from our short conversation today as well, which has been great. What has come through loud and clear is definitely your kind of passion and the work that you and the team are doing at Close the Gap. So really appreciate your contribution today, and we'll definitely be sharing that on International Women's Day. But I think the key thing for me today is that it's not just about that one day of the year. There is a lot more that employers and organisations need to do to help kind of close that gap and drive that forward. So thanks very much. Really appreciate that.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.